Clients can be very demanding, and it's important that you set some good boundaries with them because it's a healthy working relationship. Most of the time, clients don't know what it takes to actually do a project. If they did, they would be the ones doing it. But no, they've hired you or someone like you for the project because you have the experience, you have the expertise. But that means it's on you to set those proper boundaries and expectations because, again, they don't know. This is really important and something I used to be worse at and I could probably always be better at, is just setting the right boundaries, setting the right expectations, and being forward with communication. A lot of times it's easy to assume that everybody knows exactly the process and the workflow and how things need to go and what's a reasonable request versus an unreasonable request. But the truth is most people don't. They don't understand cameras, technology, production, whether it's video or photo, filmmaking. They just don't understand all the ins and outs and the complexities of like why things can be a lot harder than other things. Even if you look at something that's kind of like hard to conceptualize for most people, I would say, is just the difference between like 2D and 3D animation. You can look at them and say, oh, these are obviously different, but which one is harder? Well, that's hard to say. Which one requires more expertise? Well, I don't know. Which one is worth more? I don't know. They're different and they have very different workflows and there's different ways to do each one of them. Same thing is said of like if you have an hour-long video versus a 30-second video, the revision process is going to be very different for those two pieces of content. The process for producing those pieces of content is going to be very, very different. So when you're setting boundaries with clients and you have a project, you have to take those parameters into consideration of like, what is the actual deliverable? What are we making? What are we doing? And then setting the expectations up front. And at each step of communication, saying what happened before, like where we just were, what's happening currently, and then what's about to happen next. So that way people are comfortable as they go through the process, start to finish, and they can look at it and go, okay, yeah, I do remember that's what we just did. This makes sense where we're at. And okay, sounds good for the next round of whatever it is. If it's entering pre-production or entering production or entering post-production or doing revisions or finalizing or whatever it is. Saying simple things of like where the color's at on something, right? Color grading is usually something I save for the end of my project because it doesn't usually make a lot of sense to do it at the beginning, at least final color. There's some nuance there. I do usually do some color, so it's not like log and saying like, hey, imagine good looking color. It's like, no, just know like I've put some color on here, but it's not final. So if you have, and I might even say something like that, say, hey, there's color on here, but it still isn't the final color grade. I'm going to do a final color pass. If there's something that you want me to pay particular attention to, just let me know. And that way you don't get the feedback of like, why does the color look so bad? It can be more of like, hey, this one spot looks a little green or it looks a little weird. Can you look at that and make sure it's fixed? So that way communication isn't frustrating and people are criticizing things that they're not necessarily supposed to be criticizing. The other thing, revisions, when you're doing them, you can ask for specific revisions. You can say, hey, can you look at this portion or this piece or what do you think of this? I want feedback on just this. Don't look at this other stuff. That's also very helpful to kind of frame the conversation, not just send something and say, what do you think? That's very open-ended, direct. Hey, how does the audio sound? I'm really working on the music. What do you think of it? You know, like if that's the type of feedback you want, start that conversation yourself. The main thing with setting boundaries is just being proactive, leading up front instead of constantly having to recover from an unexpected note or circumstance that's thrown at you. If you're going into production and you're going to say, here are the people that are going to be there. This is the time we're going to be there. We're going to be there until this time, right? The end of day. This is how long we're going to be there. Setting up, if you have some kind of overtime policy, letting the client know that up front, saying, if we go past this time, we will enter overtime, which is time and a half or double the rate, however you have it set up for your specific situation. Knowing all that up front is really good rather than being on set and, 8 o'clock comes around and you go, hey, Now we're entering double time. And they're like, wait, what? What's happening? No. I didn't sign up for that. And then that way, if it is that situation, you say, hey, and you did tip them off before, you say, hey, after this time, that's when we're going to enter overtime. That time can happen on set, and say, as you recall, as I told you, now we're entering overtime. Is that okay? Or should we just call it a day for now and come back tomorrow? All of that stuff is a lot easier conversation to have when you've set those boundaries up front. Always be proactive. Lead with the restrictions and stipulations and if this then that, but if this then that. The more that you can kind of role play and strategize and theorize of what's the worst case scenario, what's the best case scenario, paint those pictures for people, they're going to be a lot more understanding of when those things take place. Hey, best case scenario, we're done by 4 o'clock. So when you end at 4 o'clock, they know, hey, this was a great day. Awesome. Worst case scenario, we might be there till 9 p.m. And then 8:30 rolls around and they're like, well, we got 30 minutes left. Like that's the kind of stuff you need to do up front at every single step of the conversation. If you're in scripting, hey, take a look at this. This is where we're at. This is what needs to be addressed. I'm going to do 2 more rounds of revisions on this as per the contract. There's so much communication that seems unnecessary, right? If you have a contract signed up front and everyone's agreed to those terms, it can be easy just to assume, yeah, we're all on the same page. But people forget what's in contracts. They forget what they signed a week, 2 weeks, a month ago. You have to always remind them and say, and not in a mean, aggressive way of like, as per the contract, just say, oh yeah, and if you do it, my point is being proactive and doing it beforehand, right? So you can lead into these things and it's not after the fact of, oh, that's actually going to be an extra $10,000 because of such and such a fee as per the contract. They're going to be like, what in the world? Wait, you didn't tell me this was going to happen. Set those expectations, set those boundaries up beforehand. And the more experience you have doing this, the better you are at figuring out like what is the common thing that happens all the time? What's most likely to happen? Typically, it is extra rounds of revisions, I would say. If you have a project, revisions can eat into your time. You might budget for a round or 2 of revisions, and then that can go on to 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 rounds of revisions. Now every next round eats into your profits, your whatever you made on the project. And so you've really got to set those things up front and say, this is what we're going to address. And what I personally like to do in that situation to avoid it, I make my rough cut as good as possible so that way the revisions are minimal and I can say, hey, here's the video. What do you think? The only thing I have left to do are X, Y, and Z, which is probably color and audio typically, and maybe some graphic stuff. But for the most part, I want things pretty close to final on that rough cut. I want people to provide valuable revisions, not having to use their imagination. You've seen cuts like that, I'm sure, where there's just like, 30 seconds of black and it's like, imagine an animation here, or this is where we're going to do the montage that we haven't filmed yet, or this is where, and now the person's watching it and they can't actually give feedback because they're just looking at a black screen and they have to use their imagination. So when that thing is finally filled in on the next round or 2 of revisions, now they're actually at a point where they can properly review it. So whenever possible, give the most information. That way you get the most valuable information back. If you don't communicate, you're setting yourself up for failure and for problems down the road because now people are on different pages. People have different assumptions. The client's thinking one thing, you're thinking another thing. And as I said, you're the one that knows how to actually do it. They don't know. They just know, they kind of know, well, like we hired this person to do this thing and they're not getting it to us on time. Lead them. It's, kind of hold them by the hand and walk them through the process so they know what just happened, where they're at now, and where you're going next. That's the safest way to operate. You're going to have problems. There's going to be issues. There's going to be maybe a little drama here or there of something unexpected. But those are a lot easier fires to put out than someone going way over budget and not planning on it, or your time is sucked into something that you weren't even planning on doing. There's just a lot of bad outcomes if people aren't all on the same page, operating from the same set of boundaries and expectations up front.